Hello and welcome to Heartbeat. This week, William sits down for an interview with Sara Spencer on cancel culture. Catherine brings us a roundup of news from home and abroad, and I'll give my viewpoint on the growth of new media.
Today I'm joined by Sara Spencer, an American citizen living in Scotland who herself has first-hand experience of cancel culture. Sara, thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
Now, Sara, you were studying midwifery at Edinburgh Napier University, and then out of nowhere hit a fairly major bump in the road. Can you tell us about this chapter in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was just last year, actually. I started a training program, a Master's of Midwifery in January 2024 at Edinburgh Napier, and started out with a theory portion. So it was just learning the art and science of midwifery to begin with. And then after a few months of that, we all went off on our first clinical placements, which was a community midwifery setting. So not quite yet seeing women in hospital or giving birth, but rather seeing them out in the community in their homes and in antenatal clinics during their pregnancies. And it really was going perfectly well. I was loving it. And then we had our spring break period. And during that time off, I got involved in a Facebook debate, as I often find myself embroiled in.
As we all have.
Right. And it was in a really large group for midwives in the making, is what's called Secret Community for Midwives in the Making. And it has a variety of both current midwives that have already qualified, as well as prospective or potential midwives pursuing training. And one woman who had recently joined the group posed a question to this large group of, I think at the time it was 35,000 different members, asking if it was possible to train as a midwife if you were opposed to abortion, and if you would be required to partake in abortion procedures, even if you had that moral objection to it. And the responses that came in were very factual, to be fair. They said, you don't have to partake in the abortion procedures. You are allowed to be a conscientious objector. This is a legal right. This is a right which the Nursing and Midwifery Council upholds. But many of them gave a qualifier to that information, saying that they really, wanted her to reconsider its career path if that was how she felt. And I jumped in wanting to kind of oppose that sentiment and say, yes, you can train and practice without engaging in these procedures. And also, I'm a pro-life student midwife. And if you want to talk about how that looks, then feel free to contact me. And saying that kind of brought in an onslaught of different responses, ranging from curious to offended.
Yeah.
And a debate ensued.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the other lady there. Do you know what's happened to her career? Has she continued to study?
I'm not sure, actually. I'll have to follow up with her. We are Facebook friends now, so I'm not sure if she did decide to pursue midwifery or intends to. But she did engage with some more of the responses and kind of tried to defend herself as saying, I have no judgment towards women. I would never express any judgment towards women. I understand that they have the free choice, to go whichever the way they want with a pregnancy. But personally, I couldn't be involved in it. And I want to know if this is a career path that would still be open to me. For my part, I was the only one in the comments of some 100+ comments that stated I was pro-life myself. And people were really interested in what I meant by that. And what I've come to find in browsing through kind of historical conversations on this topic is many people in the UK who do bravely declare themselves as pro-life mean it in the sense that they are personally pro-life, that they would never have an abortion themselves, which is very interesting to me. I think I've learned that the pro-life title is so unpopular that it's interesting to me that anyone would adopt it if they weren't quite, completely pro-life. But I think that's maybe what some people were hoping to tease out of me. Is this just a personal position? Because if so, you're pro-choice. And that's completely right. I applaud them for their desire to get correct on the meaning of terms. But I can't, I shocked them all to say, no, I am thoroughly pro-life, actually. And I don't think there should be a right to abortion. And they kind of pulled more on that string and said, well, why not? What do you think abortion is? And I said plainly, and I'm a big fan of speaking plainly and being very clear about what our terms are and our grounds for believing things or supporting things. So I just said very simply in black and white that I believe abortion is the killing of a child. And I think for most people who aren't themselves pro-life very seldom find themselves faced with that statement. So it was very shocking to everyone that I said that. And they, so just those words were people came back saying, I hope you would never use this sort of language in front of another woman, under your care, to which I said, of course not. It's not my professional role to share with women my views on abortion. That's not what a midwife's role is. And then many said, well, regardless of that, I feel for any woman who might come under your care. And I beg you to consider a different career path. These were exact quotes. So yeah, it started as just a kind of social exclusion on a Facebook group, which I was fully prepared for and fairly unfazed by. And really, I just appreciated the opportunity to engage in the debate and give a good defense of the pro-life position within a midwifery context.
But then it got a bit more serious.
It got a lot more serious.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks later, when I was back on placement, my midwifery manager in community asked to speak with me privately. And when she said that, I was racing through all my memories of the previous weeks of practice and what I possibly could have done wrong to warrant a private meeting with the manager. And I sat down and she said, I've called you here to have a difficult conversation. I've been informed, it's been brought to my attention, some things that you've recently posted online. And my thoughts were just like, in one sense, I breathed this huge sigh of relief that it wasn't something actually serious and important, that I hadn't, done something terrible in practice. But then I was just kind of dazed, like, why is this being brought to why are we having a conversation about this? And she said, so I just said, oh, and she said, I trust you don't need me to tell you what comments I'm referring to. You know what you posted.
So what sounds like quite a patronizing tone.
Hugely.
Yeah.
And she was kind of an intimidating lady anyway,
Yeah.
So there was no room for me to kind of question or push back. She said, I'm going to have to raise this issue with your university. I just want you to be informed of that. And then she said, also, I'd like you to read this. And she handed me the Nursing and Midwifery Council guidance on use of social media, which is something I was already thoroughly familiar with because we were told to familiarize ourselves with these policies prior to going into practice. But she handed that to me and she said, that's all. Just wanted to keep you in the loop and I'll be moving forward with your university on the matter.
So, Sarah, you mentioned the 100+ people in the comments who were essentially against you. That's 100+ people who are scandalized by the mere fact that you were a midwife speaking out for life, essentially. That's what it really boils down to.
Yeah, absolutely. And their framing of it, which I'm very sympathetic to because it's these completely diametrically opposed worldviews. Their framing was midwife means with woman in Latin. So you're not with baby. Your whole focus should be on supporting the woman. And if the woman wants to end a pregnancy, your job is to be with woman, which is, it's it's completely inaccurate. It sounds really powerful and it sounds sensible. And I can understand why so many would think, oh, well, that's it. That's a nice, clean, simple answer. I know what to think about this topic in the future. But in my part and how I challenged it was actually in practice, I think we all know intuitively and officially we have two patients to care for. And surely we can get into discussions about when the life of the mother or the health of the mother is at risk, whose health do we prioritize? And this question comes up in myriad ways. If the woman is facing diabetes during the pregnancy, if she has a pre-existing epilepsy condition, can she continue taking her medication even though that might cause harm to the baby, but not taking it might cause harm to the baby? There are so many complicated medical questions which we can discuss, but simply saying, well, no, the baby should always be the last thing on our minds. We're here with woman, I think is a really improper, inaccurate, and dangerous way to think. But when it comes to the topic of abortion, that's the answer that's given quite confidently and simply.
Yeah, so this is a contemporary reframing of what it means to be a midwife, to the complete exclusion of the unborn child with sole focus on the woman. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, Sarah, as you alluded to earlier, that confusion arose because of your use of the term pro-life. I think that's maybe an argument for us as pro-lifers to maybe use the term anti-abortion more, to just be clearer, because that would have, I mean, your situation would have been played out similarly, I'm sure, but it would have cleared up a lot of confusion.
No, I agree. I'm very sympathetic with that as well. I hate how the anti-pro-life talking point is, oh, and are you pro every other person's life? And are you feeding all the, I think it shifts the goalposts. It changes the topic of the conversation. Ultimately, I'm just against killing tiny humans.
Exactly, yes. Now, Sarah, for me, there's a tragic irony in the fact that what is a life-giving profession, a vocation really, like midwifery, has seemingly been compromised by the forces of the culture of death. How do you personally think that we got here?
I think things like birth control played a large role, just cultural changes, technological changes throughout history. We've come to expect that things like sex and relationships aren't inherently directed towards children, and they don't need to be directed towards children. And so that kind of normalization of there's no inherent relationship between sex and children, coupled with the disdain people have learned to have toward anyone who would question a woman's right to choose. So in the media and culture and in people's personal experiences, you'll talk to a lot of older women who will say, I remember the time that women were going and having back alley abortions, or I remember that fear of not having that option. And they don't want to go back to those dark ages. So that it's just put the question of abortion firmly in the camp of freedom of human rights, of women's human rights to choose and have bodily autonomy. And for my part, when I was in college, as most people in college do, I was venturing down a very progressive liberal mindset and saw all these questions of anything, feminism and pro-choice, pro-life. The most intuitive answer was always the one that seemed to make people feel good and make people feel affirmed. And the affirming position to me in college was obviously it's none of my business what a woman does with her body. And for me, it took someone saying, well, what about the other person's body? What about the body inside of her? And yeah, I'm embarrassed to say that was a light bulb moment for me.
A question as simple as that.
Yeah, it really, really was.
Yeah.
And coupled with, I said, I just don't think this should be legalized. It's a moral question. People come to different moral positions. It shouldn't be a matter of law. And it was this older man I was speaking to as well. And he said, well, what about murdering anybody then? That's a moral question. So should law not get involved with that moral question? Do you think people should have the right to murder others? And again, that was another light bulb of like, oh no, I don't think that. So then how am I being consistent in my thinking here? And it's so crazy to think that it took such simple questions to reevaluate. And I'm glad that for my own part, I crave intellectual consistency, and I crave being able to have the last word in an argument. So when I couldn't respond to that, it really troubled me and caused me to investigate and self-reflect. And I ended up eventually coming to a very different conclusion. But I think most people sadly aren't like that. They don't crave intellectual consistency, and they don't want to win the argument based on sound argument alone. They're happy to win an argument based on shaming you. And if they think that they feel better, sound better, look better, and most people would agree with them, then that's enough. That's sufficient for them to win the argument. And so much of that was played out in the Facebook debate I was in as well, where people would just say, like at one point, I did make a comparison to, well, should a woman have the right to murder her born children if, she doesn't have the financial or emotional resources to take care of them? And the response was simply, the fact that you can compare the two things is just outrageous. I have nothing more to say to you. There's no intellectual engagement with it. It's just, you are so ridiculous, the end.
It's that kind of virtue signaling whereby one can feel virtuous without necessarily being or acting virtuous. And also good on that man for his line of questioning, which brought you to where you are now.
Absolutely.
Now, Sarah, several years ago, we had a very high-profile court case in Scotland where SPUC supported, you might know of it, where SPUC supported two senior midwives who were not able to claim conscientious objections to involvement in abortion. Now, with midwifery in the NHS nowadays encompassing abortion and the persecution that you have just explained that you faced at the hands of both NHS Fife and Edinburgh Napier University, do you think that midwifery is a career that serious pro-lifers in the UK should consider?
Absolutely. For my part, I'm questioning my future in midwifery. But there's a lot to that, apart from the issue of abortion and freedom of expression more generally. But for those that do feel called toward healthcare, are interested in careers in healthcare generally, are interested in midwifery, we need more people on the ground who have these sentiments, not just from I have a couple of friends who are still training as midwives and do share pro-life sentiments, but aren't as outspoken. And one has said, I don't have that bravery. I'm going to keep my head down and get through the program.
Understandable.
And it's very understandable. But even her presence in training on like a spiritual level, is valuable. And the fact that she's committing these babies and these women to prayer and not being one more person mindlessly parroting very pro-choice sentiments, it's so valuable. And so I would definitely entreat people to go, not let their pro-life views keep them out of healthcare or keep them out of midwifery. We need you. Babies need you. Mothers who aren't certain need you. But I would temper that and say that personally, I think I'm not convinced that the rights of conscientious objectors in Scotland are on hugely solid ground. I think it's pure luck that we still have the ability to conscientiously object at all. Most midwives in practice don't think that it should be a right that people have. They think it's a dereliction of duty. They think it's like some of the comments on this Facebook debate were, I am disgusted that any midwife would put her religious position above her duty of care. So that's what it's seen like. It's seen as you're just being this bigot and you're prioritizing your bigotry over someone's health. How dare you? You have no place in healthcare. So you to me, that says that things might change in the future. I'm not sure that midwives in Scotland and perhaps in the UK generally will continue to be granted the protection of conscientious objection. In the meantime, you do have that legal right. You can utilize it. You can go into practice knowing that you will not have to partake in abortions, but socially you will most likely be seen as a pariah, be seen as someone who's not fit for the role. And that's really difficult to handle. So go in with both eyes open.
Yes. So you'd encourage pro-lifers considering a career in midwifery to, without compromising on their principles, on their pro-life beliefs, to be prudent at least.
Yeah.
That sort of balance. Now, Sarah, your case even caught the attention of Fox News, as I'm sure you saw. How would you say that the free speech situation here in the UK, and particularly in Scotland in your context, compares with that of the US?
Yeah, we're in a bit of a dire position. But there's a very different culture here, I've noticed. In America, we hugely value freedom of expression. And even on a temperamental basis, I think we are very prepared to freely express. And that's just as part of who we are. It's not an inherently offensive thing to do. Engaging in arguments is normal and good. And
it's refreshing.
Yeah, refreshing and friendly and relationship building, and intellectually responsible. I've found that that's not the case here. And at so many times I felt like, am I just being seen as too pro-life, or am I being seen as too argumentative, period? Like, am I being seen as too outspoken, period? And it's just not what's done here. So I think that kind of feeds into it. And, historical realities of how people value freedom of speech in this country, I think is just very different. And I think people prefer here the right of freedom from offense, which is so troubling to me. But I think I see very frequently here, people think they have a right to not be offended and to not have to see or hear offensive things. And that's what should be protected above and beyond anyone else's right to freedom of expression.
Most definitely. And I think generally speaking, there is a distinct lack of critical thinking here. I encounter it an awful lot. Now, Sarah, ultimately you won your fight, thank God, against the education establishment and the health establishment. Would you say that this has strengthened your resolve to fight for the unborn?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a glimmer of hope in the darkness. It was such, so I had to go through what's called a fitness to practice investigation at my university. This is something that professional midwives and nurses might have to go to as well once they're qualified. If there's any complaint against them, they go through a fitness to practice investigation with the Nursing Midwifery Council directly. So mine was carried out at the university level. And unfortunately, I think it's very much luck of the draw. I happened to have an officer assigned to my case who was inclined to think critically and be non-biased in his reception of my defense. And I went into the meeting terrified of how I would be received. I had spent hours preparing a defense. I'd written up, I think, a 3,000-word statement. And I asked if I could simply read it aloud. And the whole time I'm reading it, I'm thinking, do they think I'm just being pretentious, that I'm being too defensive? I had no idea how they would receive it. But by the time I finished, they said, wow, that is probably the best defense that we have ever heard in a fitness to practice case. And they reiterated that in an email to me. They reached out, I think it was only 5 days later, saying, this needs to be formally approved by the rest of the fitness to practice office, but I just wanted to not keep you waiting and let you know you have no case to answer here. And thank you for being so thorough in your preparation. So it was a hugely touching, lovely outcome in that regard. And it did give me a lot of hope for that, good things can come to those who argue their case respectfully and thoroughly and have good sound reasons for their positions. And some people will have to step back and think, oh, I never thought about it that way, and I don't agree with her conclusion, but I can see that she's not being hateful or bigoted or closed-minded. and why she's coming to this conclusion. Still, though, anyone who wasn't in the room, who didn't hear all 3,000 words of my defense, they didn't have the same thinking at all. So when that no case to answer outcome was delivered to the NHS Fife, to the health board that had suspended me, NHS Fife rejected it. They said this was not the outcome we were anticipating, and we demand an explanation. They said we're not happy to have Sara Spencer back on placement.
They were put out, essentially.
So put out. So shocked.
The arrogance.
Very much, yeah. And I don't know how that played out. I think they were put in touch with the dean of the school, who probably just relayed, we carried out our due process and this is it, period. I don't know. The school could have appealed the decision if they wanted to, or not the school, the health board, NHS Fife, but they decided not to and let me back. But I returned knowing that they were begrudging my presence and not having full answers to why they decided to change their mind and let me back, or why they were so opposed. I mean, I know why they were opposed to me. They didn't think I had any place holding my views and being in a hospital setting with the public. But I just wish I could have engaged that conversation more with the administration of the hospital. Unfortunately, that door was never opened to me. They refused to have a sit down conversation. And so it's not hugely hopeful, because on the one hand, even at the university level, if I could have gotten a case officer that was far less open-minded, and I may have been penalized and not permitted to come back to practice. It could have very easily been a very different story. And then on the health board's end, they basically had no choice unless they wanted to really go down a huge rabbit hole of legality and fighting the system. So I think they basically just rolled their eyes and let me back in, but they don't want people like us there.
No, it's frightening, Sarah, but thank God that your story finished the way it did. And also, I think you should take pride in the fact that you did get the chance to read out your 3,000-word monologue and that it had the effect that it did. So, Sarah, thank you for speaking to us, and thank you for championing the rights of the unborn in your life.
Yeah,
thank
absolutely.
You.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much. Cheers, Sarah.
As the years go by, our thoughts turn to the legacy we'll leave behind. Family, friends, memories, they all form part of the life we've lived. SPUC works to protect the most vulnerable among us. We put unborn children first. We speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. You can help us with this work by leaving a legacy to SPUC. It could be the most far-reaching gift you ever make, and it will allow our life-changing work to continue. Email the address on screen or call the number shown and help us to fight for life.
The 53rd Annual March for Life took place in Washington, D.C. last week. Tens of thousands turned out in bitter cold to show their support for the unborn, while Pope Leo XIV sent a message of support to the marchers. Pope Leo said, "I send warm greetings to those of you participating in the 2026 March for Life. I likewise express heartfelt appreciation and assure you of my spiritual closeness as you gather for this eloquent public witness to affirm that the protection of the right to life constitutes the indispensable foundation of every other human right." The march, which ended outside the US Supreme Court, was addressed by US Vice President J.D. Vance, who urged the crowd to work to create a culture of life.
We are trying to argue to our fellow citizens that we must build up that culture of life. And as you know, that effort is going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of energy, and it's going to take a little bit of money. And that's why we're here, because you know that. We're marching for life because we want our wonderful fellow Americans, even if they don't disagree with us, to know that life is worthy, it is worthy of protection, and that is why we march today.
The Vice President also used the occasion to announce the removal of all US funding for any NGOs who promote or provide abortion.
We're going to start blocking every international GO that performs or promotes abortion abroad from receiving $1 of US money.
Former SPUCTV guest and spokesperson for Secular Pro-Life, Herb Garrity, commented on the march exclusively for SPUCTV.
Hey, this is Herb Garrity from Secular Pro-Life here at the National March for Life in Washington, D.C. with a couple thousand of my closest friends. It's been really cool to get to meet everyone from all across the country who believe different things, but who all believe in the right to life.
A new long-term US study shows that many women continue to carry deep emotional wounds years after an abortion, a reality that challenges the dominant narrative of abortion as a harmless healthcare choice. According to a report in the Catholic Herald, researchers tracked thousands of women over decades and found that approximately 1 in 4 reported enduring feelings of regret, sadness and loss long after the procedure. For many, these emotions persisted well into later life, even among those who initially reported neutrality or relief. These findings reinforce what counsellors and pregnancy support workers have long observed. Abortion often leaves emotional and spiritual scars that do not simply disappear with time. The study's revelations come amid ongoing societal debates that too often prioritise choice over truth, minimising the complex human cost of abortion. Psychologists working with post-abortive women say the research underscores the reality that abortion is not merely a momentary decision, but one that can reverberate through relationships and self-identify for decades. SPUC welcomed the study as further evidence that abortion impacts more than unborn children. It affects women's hearts and minds. SPUC believe these insights should prompt wider efforts to offer genuine, life-affirming alternatives and compassionate support to women facing unplanned pregnancies, along the lines of SPUC's ARCH counselling service. The study also highlighted that women lacking robust social support or access to counselling were more likely to experience prolonged distress. The research clearly points to an urgent need for stronger networks of care, including pregnancy help centres and post-abortion healing ministries rooted in mercy and reconciliation. A recent article in the online journal Spiked has suggested that assisted suicide bill is class warfare at its ugliest. In the article, Dan Hitchin quotes former Labour Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who stated in 1975, "A policy of euthanasia would be wholly abhorrent, and there is absolutely no possibility of this government, or I believe of any government, ever giving it support." Hitchens goes on to highlight the irony of Keir Starmer, an admirer of Wilson, going on to covertly support the terminally ill adults' end-of-life bill. The assisted suicide legislation currently being debated in the House of Lords argues that it exemplifies a grim and troubling shift in social values, which the former Labour leader would have strongly opposed. A central criticism is that one of the bill's sponsors, Lord Falconer, has explicitly stated that applicants' financial circumstances, including poverty, could legitimately influence a decision to seek assisted suicide, and this should not bar eligibility. This would make economic and social hardship valid motivations for ending one's life, effectively devaluing the lives of the poor and vulnerable, traditionally Labour's strongest supporters. The terminally ill adults end-of-life bill has become a stark illustration of how far British politics has drifted from protecting the most vulnerable. According to critics in Spikes, the legislation has evolved into class warfare at its ugliest, with even peers suggesting that poverty or social disadvantage might legitimately influence someone's decision to seek an assisted death, a notion that should shock all who value human dignity. SPUC has repeatedly warned that this legislation normalises suicide for certain groups, undermines suicide prevention strategies, and sends a dangerous message that some lives are less worth living, especially when factors like poverty, isolation, or disability are tolerated as influences on someone's choice. These concerns echo broader criticisms from health professionals, disability advocates, and MPs who argue that the bill inadequately protects the vulnerable. In a significant development in Paris this week, the French Senate dealt a major blow to the country's assisted suicide and euthanasia legislation by rejecting the central operational clause of the draft law. Senators voted against Article 4, the section that would have defined eligibility and conditions for medical assistance in dying, leaving the proposal without its essential mechanism and casting doubt over its future. The vote on January the 21st saw 144 senators oppose the article compared with 123 in favour, reflecting deep divisions within the upper chamber and across the political spectrum. Without this clause, the bill's provision on assisted dying and euthanasia become effectively inoperative, forcing the text back to the National Assembly for further revision. The Senate's decision underscores the complexity and controversy surrounding these measures and the very real risks they pose when framed as responses to suffering rather than commitments to comprehensive care. By stripping the bill of its core article, lawmakers have exposed the fragility of consensus on assisted suicide and the need for deeper reflection on alternatives that truly support people in crisis. Government supporters in the National Assembly have indicated they may continue to pursue the legislation, and a further vote on the full text is scheduled. However, with the Senate's rejection shaking the foundation of the proposal, its prospects now look very uncertain. Finally, a troubling court case in British Columbia, Canada, has drawn international attention to the dangerous implications of assisted suicide frameworks. A Vancouver man identified only as TW was stripped of authority to make medical decisions for his 77-year-old wife after a judge found he had formulated a plan to end her life if assisted dying was unavailable. According to court findings, the husband repeatedly told family, friends and health officials that he intended to kill his wife, who has Alzheimer's disease and who had not consented to death, and then take his own life if she could not access euthanasia. The case involved detailed preparations by TW, including purchasing funeral plots and writing obituaries, behaviours that alarmed care facility staff. The court concluded that his death plan, falsely framed as an assisted suicide alternative, posed a clear threat to the vulnerable woman, leading to his removal as her representative. This case provides a stark warning about the broader consequences that can arise when cultures and legal systems normalise killing as an option in caregiving. What should be understood as premeditated murder was discussed in the language of assisted dying, highlighting how lethal legal frameworks can distort judgments about care, coercion and vulnerability, particularly where individuals cannot speak for themselves. I'm Catherine Moakler, and this was SPUCTV News, bringing to light what others hide.
Recently, I asked an AI program how many pro-life channels there were on YouTube. It suggested there were dozens, maybe even hundreds, and then listed the top 5. 4 of the top 5 were in the USA, but one of them, this channel, SPUCTV, was also there. I was about to follow up by asking how much pro-life content there was on the BBC when I realised I already knew the answer to that question. It's 0. So, is it a surprise that the BBC has just been overtaken by YouTube, with more people watching the video platform than watch the BBC? Of course not. And for the BBC, it's only going to get much worse. I'm Peter Kearney, and this is my Viewpoint. In 2019, following the launch of the new BBC Scotland channel, costing around £32 million, the broadcaster's Audience Research Board data showed that over 20 BBC programmes recorded 0 viewers in their consolidated figures. Now, this doesn't actually mean 0, as in no one watched. It means that the figures were so small, in the low thousands, that they're basically rounded down to 0. Among those whose ratings fell through the floor were several editions of The Seven, BBC Scotland's flagship evening news bulletin, the discussion show The Collective, and a new music programme called Tune. So, the BBC can, and does, make content that's so terrible no one watches it. But we all still have to pay for it through the licence fee, which currently raises around about £3.8 billion a year. That's what economists would describe as a lot of money. But while it's hard to avoid paying for the BBC, it's not hard to avoid watching it. And more people are deciding to do exactly that. A recent report in the Times showed that more people watch the video platform YouTube than the UK's largest broadcaster. 2 decades ago, the BBC comfortably dominated the most watched shows of the year. Its programmes accounted for half of the top 100 most watched shows and often had audiences over 10 million for popular programmes. Now, YouTube has overtaken the BBC for short-term viewers. According to the data gathered by the independent ratings body BARB, the number of people watching YouTube for at least 3 consecutive minutes per month has consistently been higher than the figure for the BBC since it started measuring it last October. Barb found that YouTube reached 51.9 million people in December of 2025, ahead of the 50.9 million who tuned in to the BBC. It's a pivotal moment in viewing history, and a dreadful one for the BBC. The former BBC producer, Stephen D. Wright, told The Times the figures were a tragedy. He said, "The tipping point is here, and we are now living in a world dominated by YouTube and the streamers. The TV audience has abandoned the discipline of scheduled TV, and on-demand viewing has killed any loyalty. Who wants to wait when you can click your phone? That audience is slowly dying off, and it's a tragedy." But is it really a tragedy? Aren't the people who complain about the demise of the BBC a bit like the Luddites who smashed up the steam-driven machinery of the Industrial Revolution, or the blacksmiths who complained when the invention of the car put them out of business? If something newer, better, and fairer comes along, why shouldn't we use it? And fairer really is the point. Over the last 20 years, BBC News have covered SPUC comments or statements on very few occasions. We've released dozens and dozens of press releases in that time, but BBC News mentions us on average once per year. By contrast, BPAS and Mary Stopes International, or MSI, the UK's 2 largest abortion providers, are routinely quoted or featured in stories about abortion law, services, statistics, prosecutions, buffer zones, and policy changes. Over the last 20 years, BBC News have covered their comments or statements on many occasions. On average, they referenced about 10 times per year. That's a bit of a contrast, isn't it? The organisations that defend abortion get around 10 times more news coverage from the BBC than the organisation that wants to end abortion. Is that fair? Is it reasonable? Is that what we pay our licence fee for? Of course not. It's a travesty of unfairness, bias, distortion and misinformation, something the BBC is so keen to call others out for. Unlike the superannuated broadcasters bemoaning the BBC's decline, we should really be celebrating it, since BBC decline means an end to the lies, distortion and misinformation they brought to reports on every single life issue that there is. In 2024, YouTube overtook ITV to become the second most watched broadcaster, accounting for around 19% of video watched, according to Ofcom. Its progress has been boosted by older adults turning to the digital platform as it began to mirror traditional TV more closely, with a growing number of long-form interviews and documentaries. Almost 2/3 of trending YouTube material is estimated to be of that sort, and 41% of in-home viewing now takes place on a TV set. In its Global Culture and Trends 2025 report, published last month, YouTube said that accusations that it was exacerbating the dwindling of attention spans were misplaced. They said, quote, "While focus is on the undeniable growth of short-form video, something interesting has been happening with long-form, whose content's popularity has been thriving too. The endurance of long form is not just counter to the prevalent narrative about the direction of video creation and consumption, it's also a cultural mandate. Viewers are seeking more profound and more insightful content, perhaps precisely in reaction to the feeling of surface-level information. Authenticity, depth, and trust will always demand and receive the audience's full attention. And the fact that you are watching this tends to bear that out. Here at SPUCTV, we produce long-form content, and with your support, we plan to do much more of that in future. When YouTube claim that viewers are seeking more profound and more insightful content, we know that's true. Our content, which, as we always remind you, brings to light what others hide, is exactly what the BBC should be producing, but they don't and they won't. We've joined thousands of organisations and individuals who've given up waiting for the BBC to do the right thing, to do their job, to fulfil their legal remit of balance and rigour. We've had enough of their relentless pro-abortion propaganda and their anti-life bias, and we've chosen to invest in the people and the technology needed to bring you the truth on the stories you want to hear but can't find anywhere else. Certainly not on the BBC. The fact that we're ranked as one of the top 5 pro-life content producers in the world on the YouTube platform is something we're very proud of. And we're also very grateful to you, our viewers, for the support you've given to get us there. It's worth remembering that adults aged 16 to 24 now watch just 17 minutes of live television per day, with less than half tuning in to broadcast television each week. Currently, the BBC's share of all in-home video viewing, live TV, iPlayer and recorded playback is around 20% of overall audiences. But among younger audiences, the 16 to 34 age group, the BBC's share is about half that figure, at round about 9%, and that's including the iPlayer. Put another way, around 90% of young people have never and will never watch anything from the BBC. And who can blame them?
SPUCTV is currently investigating cases where abortion pills have been used violently or coercively. If you or someone you know has experienced this, please let us know. You can remain completely anonymous when you contact us, but please do get in touch. Contact SPUCTV by emailing the address on screen now. Silence protects abuse. Speaking out protects lives.
That's all we have time for this week. If you're enjoying our content, please like, comment and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions or topics you think we should cover, please email us at the address on the screen or in the description below. Thank you for watching.